I'm Alex Greenwood. Welcome to Mysterious Goings On. Frequent listeners to the show will note that the rise of the character-driven thriller is meaningful to me, not just as a reader, but as an author of a series of books that center on characters in thrilling and mysterious circumstances. Well, that's why I know you will enjoy meeting author Burt Weissbourd. His novels feature living, breathing, psychologically complex characters enmeshed in thrilling and mysterious circumstances. He brings us along for the ride, page after page, with stories that possess a cinematic flavor that may stem from the fact that he is also a former Hollywood movie producer, including such films as Ghost Story and Raggedy Man. Let's learn more about his latest novel, Danger in Plain Sight, and more, as we welcome Burt Weissbourd to Mysterious Goings On. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I was so excited when we were connected because I am a major proponent of the character-driven thrillers and mysteries. I'm probably the antithesis of the Agatha Christie style. The mystery's important and all that, but I want to read about real characters that aren't, kind of two-dimensional. I assume you feel the same way.
Oh, my very first experience working with a writer for a film producer was with Ross MacDonald, who, as you know, is a great mystery writer. And he really taught me a lot about how you can have complicated plots that are still character driven. And I will never forget these long meetings we would have where we would go over a book that he had written. It was The Instant Enemy. And we turned it into a screenplay. And of course, there's lots of things that you can't do in a screenplay that are easy to do in a book. And he made it really a beautiful job of making these people come alive so that a lot of the detail from the book wasn't necessary for the screenplay.
Right.
And, I went on to work with writers like Andy Lewis, who wrote Clute, and Stuart Stern, who wrote Rebel Without a Cause.
Oh.
Alvin Sargent, who wrote Ordinary People. They're all character-driven writers. And it was working with screenplays. And of course, when you work on a screenplay, you have a finite number of pages you can use. You have a finite number of scenes. And it becomes very important that you don't waste anything. And the thing that you spend the most time working on with these great screenwriters is who the people are and where they want them to go. And everything else follows.
Perfect. I totally agree with you, because if you don't care about the characters, then you're really not going to get into the book, I don't think. I have to ask you something since you brought up Mr. MacDonald. I'm reading Danger in Plain Sight, and I come across a character named Lew, spelled L-E-W. Now, come on. Am I making the right connection here or no?
Yes, you are.
So you named Callie's son after
Lew Archer.
Lew Archer. Oh, man. See, I love it when I figure these things out correctly. I love the little Easter eggs.
You have it exactly right.
All right, good. Well, folks, if you haven't read any Ross MacDonald, check it out. Lew Archer, I think he started was it the 40s that Ross MacDonald started his heyday?
Yeah, I think that's right. Blue City, long time ago.
Yeah, and he had a large series of books with the Lew Archer books, and it's got kind of a Philip Marlowe flavor. He might have even based some of Lew on Philip. I don't know. I know we're not here to talk about Ross, but I just had to, since you brought that up, because he's a favorite of mine. So I just wanted to bring that up.
I'd love to talk about him too. I mean, he was a wonderful man, and it was a great formative experience for me.
Really quickly though, I have to ask you, were you nervous when you were going to meet him, or were you fine with it? You're a young man. You were pretty close to starting out when this happened, right?
Yeah, I was just 26 or 27 years old, and I came to the Coral Casino to have lunch with him in Santa Barbara, and I was very nervous. But, he made me comfortable, and before long we were talking, and we never stopped talking for years.
Oh, man. So he just put you at ease right away.
Yeah.
And oh man, that's wonderful. It's wonderful. Well, and it's so evident in your work reading it. And now I've got, and I always jokingly say this to authors I enjoy reading is that I meet on the show. It's like, thanks a lot. Now my stack by my bed table is going to grow by 3 or 4 more books, but
I hope so.
definitely. But just in that thinking, and I know I'm kind of putting the cart before the horse, but while we're talking about this, we're talking about Lew Archer a little bit and Ross MacDonald, the hard-boiled school. I wanted to just say to you, it kept getting on my mind that your book is delightfully written, and it's the style that I kept. And bear in mind, I was reading it before I really delved too much into your backstory. I just wanted to read the book first. But the style it seemed to me a close relative to a hard-boiled narrative, because there's elements that are stated matter of fact, yet they're fleshed out in charming detail. You've got this. I don't know how you do it. You've got this balancing act between kind of that steady narrative of these are the facts, that's what's going on, but then you have these delightfully written scenes. In particular, I've marked a few, but where there's great descriptors, particularly about food and those things. So I just wondered, is that something that you consciously do?
Yeah. I mean, I spend a lot of time making sure that readers know what I'm thinking about and looking at. And, I stress looking because my background's in movies. And so a lot of my writing is unconsciously based on images in movies, and those need to be described in order to really understand them in a novel.
Well, let me step back for just a moment, just so folks understand. The book we're talking about is your latest. Now, this is a new kind of chapter, pardon the pun, for you, because you had a series previously to this, right?
Yes, I had a Corey Logan trilogy, three books.
Okay, and are those done at the trilogy level, or are you just taking a break, or how do you feel about that?
I took a break, and I love to write, and I hope I'm able to go on and write at least 3 Callie James books. This is the first one is the one you read. And then I'd like to go back and write some more Corey Logan and Abe Stein. That's the 2 characters in the Corey Logan trilogy.
Yeah, I noticed that. And you've got Callie and Cash in this book here. It seems you like to partner them up, your characters?
I do. And I like them to be very different kind of people. This is, they become couples that you just don't expect that until it happens. And then it's very sort of rewarding.
In my own series, I found that after the first book, I went beyond a trilogy, actually. But after my first book, I realized my lead character needed a buddy. He needed somebody who was also kind of the yin to his yang, that kind of thing. But they complemented each other. But so I developed this character who became a fan favorite. I dare say more so than even the lead character of the actual series, but.
That's wonderful when it happens, though, isn't it? I mean, you don't expect it.
Yeah, I always say that character is kind of like that bit of spice in the gumbo that really makes it, So
Absolutely, and both books. Well, let's talk about Danger in Plain Sight, because I had this idea of this woman who was very able in her restaurant and very in charge and competent, but not very good outside of her restaurant, and just very shut down in her emotional life and because of her history. And I had her hire a bartender who was exceptionally able in the world and was in fact a smuggler and one other thing, and very good at doing, I mean, she not a drug dealer ever, but rugs and cigars and all kinds of other things, moving them in and out of different countries. And he takes advantage of her restaurant to move some ivory. And these are Natsuko, which are, the Japanese wore them on their kimonos to hold things. And they're very rare. And he brought a bunch of them, and she caught him, and she sent him to jail. I mean, this was a mess, and she never wants to see him again. And they couldn't be 2 less likely people. And then she needs help, and he's the only one that she knows that really is able to move in that world. And it's a very unlikely team, and they fight all the time, and they end up falling in love. So that was really the challenge of this book.
Yeah, you're talking about Callie kind of hiding out in her restaurant, a French restaurant, and the book kind of goes from her long gone 14 years ago ex-husband, basically father of Lew, and he shows up needing to hide out for a couple of days, and there's potential, there's some bad guys after him, some terrorism things, but it's just starts to spin from there. And that's what I love about this book. You do have kind of a flashback, and then you get right into it, and it starts rolling. And this is what I like. I think it's great in a thriller, especially a thriller that gets it done in a couple of hundred good pages, is you don't stop rolling with this story.
I actually was delighted with how fast this book moved. I didn't expect that,
Really?
because they're complicated people, and I did spend some time developing them. But once they get together, they just, the way they talk to each other just moves very fast, and I
Yeah.
really enjoyed that.
It's really evident that those characters took a life of their own with you when you were writing it, and so it was a joy to read.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. It took you, how long did it take you to get this one together?
About a year,
Okay.
maybe a little more, but about a year. What I do is I write and then I rewrite, so that, but I would say within a year I had the book, and then I had a little more time to polish.
I one feature I see with a lot of character-driven thriller authors is that they seem to get a germ of an idea and they just kind of see where the characters take them. But maybe you're not. Maybe your process is different. Do you have it all kind of outlined and plotted out, or?
No, I don't. And a lot of people ask about that. I think partly it's my experience developing screenplays, because as a producer developing screenplays, what you're doing all the time is you're working out the stories. And you develop a sense of when you got a rich stew, good people, good things going on, and it'll turn out, but you don't need to know where it's going to turn out. And part of the fun is letting it take off and just seeing where it turns out. And that's the way I write, which I make sure I've got enough going on so that I know that these people are going to be interesting and fun together, and then they take over.
Yeah. I see too in your background that as a producer, you were very friendly to the screenwriter.
Yeah. Am I interrupting you?
No, not at all. I other than to say that you seemed like you were very protective of the screenwriter and their work.
I had an instinct, and I don't, to this day, it's one of my best ideas, and I don't know where it comes from. When I first came out to Hollywood, I didn't know anybody. This is 1975, and I did know that the Writers Guild minimum for a feature-length screenplay was $9,600. Now, I didn't know anyone. I didn't know how I was going to get in the business, but I knew I could raise $9,600. And that would be the way that I would make deals with very accomplished screenwriters, but I would protect them. I would give them things that other people wouldn't give them. I would make sure that they weren't rewritten without having the opportunity to do the rewrite themselves. I would let them be co-producers. I would make sure that they were involved in the decision-making, like the directors and the cast, and really include them in a way that most screenwriters aren't included. And writers loved that. They kept coming back, and they really liked, the way I worked with them. And that's what's the way my whole company succeeded.
And again, I'm not from Hollywood, obviously, but for everything I've read or everything I've seemed to glean from reading about Hollywood is that's very rare. That kind of attitude from a producer. I've read stories of directors. They don't want screenplay writers on the set. Sometimes they don't want them to have any real involvement with casting or directors, and that. So it sounds like
you're absolutely right.
Okay.
And I got called on the carpet a couple of times by studio executives telling me I couldn't do this and I better stop doing that. No, they really, writers were at least then. I think writers are much better treated now.
Yeah.
But back then, it's not uncommon for the star to bring their a friend in to rewrite the screenplay, even
Right.
though they had no credentials, and to protect the writers was really important to me. And it's better now. I don't get the credit for that, but it's better than it was then.
Well, obviously, you had an effect. I have to ask you, and I want to get back to Danger in Plain Sight and writing really quickly, but if I could just take a little detour about producing. I happen to have enjoyed Ghost Story. I first saw it when I was a kid, very young kid, and it scared the heck out of me, and I loved it. Um, and you were the sole producer of that, as far as I could tell, right?
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, the studio had someone on as managing the physical production as well as me, but I was the only producer.
Kind of a line producer under you, or okay.
Yeah, a line producer, exactly the right word.
Okay. So if we're talking about that, then did the studio say to you, we have this Peter Straub book we've optioned and we want you to kind of shepherd it through, or did you option it and take it to the studio?
I had made Raggedy Man, or was making Raggedy Man at Universal, and I had a lot of other deals at Universal at the time, and they knew that my strength was developing screenplays, and they had bought the book, and they came to me with the book, and I went to Larry Cohen, who ended up writing it, who'd written Carrie, and who did a wonderful job with the screenplay. And that was a good experience with Universal.
Were you ever tempted to take a swing at some of the screenplays, or did you?
Well, I did write a couple of screenplays, none of the ones that we're talking about. And I enjoyed it, but very early on, once I started writing screenplays, the problem with the movie business is, and it's true for even the best writers, is you don't have the final say. I mean, you really, are doing all kinds of compromises that may work for you, but may not. And then there are other people coming in and rewriting and da-da-da-da. And I really decided that I wanted to be able to do exactly what I wanted to do, and that you can do in a novel. And I never looked back. I never regretted that decision.
Is there one thing that the uninitiated, the just the film goer, the consumer of television, et cetera, that you kind of wish they understood about Hollywood and how it works? Is there anything you've always thought, gosh, if people kind of understood this about it, or perhaps not?
Well, I don't know. Whenever I see a really good movie, it feels a little bit like the miracle of Hanukkah. I mean,
yes, the oil lasted all the way through.
Right. I mean,
oh, shoot.
It's so hard. There's so many obstacles. There's so many things that can go wrong. There's so many things that you can't control. But it happens. Really great movies still happen. And it's particularly true now in the long form television where, writers certainly have more control and you have more time to do things. And, I think that the talent and the quality is much better. But to answer your question, I think people need to understand how hard it is to get what's on the screen to work in a way that's consistent, in a way that, is a whole story. Right. And that's very hard with a movie.
Yeah, I think, and the thing that strikes me too would be, it's a business. And
finally, yes.
and I've heard a producer I listened to, I'm just as an acquaintance, who once said, you don't necessarily get what you deserve in Hollywood, you get what you negotiate.
If you're a good negotiator.
Exactly. So I assume you did do that. And folks, we'll check out Burt's website, and we'll have links in the show notes, by the way, and you can check out more information about that. And of course, he's got a Wikipedia page and an IMDb page, talk about his movie work. But we're here specifically, though, I want to get back to Danger in Plain Sight. I want to talk about Callie James here. So I believe the inspiration for this book was drawn from restaurants in Seattle. I mean, that's pretty evident once you read it, but can you give us a little background on what kind of inspired this one?
I love restaurants. And I actually wrote something about Seattle restaurants because in my first three books, the Corey Logan trilogy, restaurants play a very important role in how these people come together and what they, I don't know, they're from different classes, and they understand restaurants differently. And I'll just digress. When they first begin to fall in love, he takes her to a French restaurant. She's never been to a French restaurant. She's a fisherwoman, and she just used to being in Alaska on a seiner, and that's a lot of how you come to understand the sort of magic that happens between them. But restaurants have that kind of capacity when they're wonderfully put together and they're wonderfully managed. And there's a lot of great restaurants in Seattle. So that seemed to me to be a logical place, because I also understood that a person who was great at a restaurant was not necessarily very able in the world. So that was the starting point for Callie James, which is she had a really bad time being married to a Frenchman who was not faithful. And she left with her son, who's never seen his father. And she was able to create a restaurant where she had some happiness, where she had some control, where it was what she wanted it to be. And it's a beautiful restaurant. So I really enjoyed creating the specifics of the restaurant. And of course, then it all falls apart and other things take over. But that's the starting point.
That sounds to me like a parallel to what you were talking about previously about a good movie being so rare. It's if people also understood restaurants, that most of them fail very quickly, but the idea of a restaurant surviving on thin margins and becoming something great like her restaurant has is also equally rare.
Oh, and that's, yeah, you're exactly right. And for a restaurant to really work and to be successful and to have a little bit of a history and then have a following doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
And it's a great accomplishment.
Yeah, and so when you get into it, so you like restaurants, so you like to eat. Do you have a favorite cuisine? Is French food a favorite, or do you like it all? Or
favorite, I mean, I'm also a fly fisherman, and so I go to Montana every year for quite a long time and have been doing for over 30 years. And this is a long-winded way of saying it. I end up cooking a lot and barbecuing myself. So I love that.
Oh,
I
man.
just love that.
Oh, me
But
too.
when I'm not doing that in Montana, I love being in restaurants, and the restaurants in New York City or in Seattle are extraordinary. It's great.
It will be so lovely once things get somewhat back to normal to go out to a restaurant again. It's
Oh
amazing.
boy, do I miss that.
I just you take for granted, or I did. I took for granted just the simple elegance of a menu and being seated and nice lighting and a little music and all of these things.
And the way they take care of you, in a good restaurant, you are really taken care of, and it seems effortless, and it's not.
It's not at all. It's not at all. Kind of like writing too, as a matter of fact. That's the other thing too about talk about control, right? Authors, and like you said previously too, after making movies, which are a huge collaboration and a compromise out the you get to be the sole, pardon the term, but you get to be God over the book. It's all on you.
That's right.
And I like that too, is because I like to be able to control the narrative, see where it's going. I can be a little indulgent, but hey, that's okay. It's your book.
Yeah, it's okay to make your own mistakes. That's why you're doing it.
Well, then I have a PhD in that, so I think I'm pretty good. So let's
join the club.
I think you're doing pretty well, Burt. But let me ask you kind of a little bit of a comparative question, but what sets Danger in Plain Sight apart from the other thrillers? Now, I want to just say this again: character driven. Right away, boom, but in general, if that's part of it, what sets it apart as far as you're concerned?
I think it's just how different all the people in the book are. I mean, it's just a very odd combination of people. Kelly, Cash, and all of his cohorts, and also the villains, who are very important characters in this book and are very unlikely unusual villains.
Right.
Are also set in a very well-known place on Bainbridge Island in Seattle. And that's a very unlikely combination of people, and that really attracted me to that story.
Yeah, I like that too, that the villains are, there's some meat to them as well. You know, you believe these villains, you know, and their motivations, and it's like Cash's motivation. He's not the villain, obviously, but I mean, I love how he's kind of this, you know, I guess lovable ne'er-do-well might be a little too on the nose, but I mean, he's definitely not an angel, but he's
Right.
a fully fleshed out human being, and you can see the complexity. And then when those two become intermingled, it's just wow, you know. I think that really sells it. So I think so too, just from what I've read. Um, Now, I guess it's an obvious question. You may get this a lot, but I'm going to have to do it too. I mean, you're a movie producer. I got to ask. So, is there a movie connection to this book? Is there like, if people were thinking, okay, well, what's it like? Is there a movie that's written similarly, or a movie that's similar to what the story and style of this book is?
No, I don't think about a specific movie when I write the book, but of course there are movie connections. There's a kind of visual style to my writing that comes from the movies. It just comes from my experience in the movies. And I love movies. I mean, in some ways, it's better to be able to write one in a book than to see one.
Oh, fascinating. Well,
but I do think about, I mean, not consciously, but I do think about how that scene would look when I'm writing it.
yeah.
And that's part of my just makeup.
Well, I like the scene setting. Would you be offended if I read just a little passage of the book that I wanted to bring up? Is that okay?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Now you'll just pardon my Midwestern twang, but here we go here. And this is actually not a dramatic scene, but it spoke to me. Cash took Callie to Katz's Deli on the Lower East Side for breakfast. Callie knew good delis in Seattle, but this was in another class entirely. Unmistakable deli smells and sounds, heavy plates with hot pastrami and corned beef, lox, gefilte fish, chopped liver with onions, and so on, hurriedly set on tables, loud, brassy, all business waitresses, busboys clearing quickly, people clamoring at the takeout counters or lined up to be seated, all contributed to the bustling, aromatic din that made Katz's a world unto itself. Callie remembered the scene from When Harry Met Sally, where Meg Ryan faked an orgasm while sitting with Billy Crystal in Katz's Deli. The spot was well marked now. The sign hung from the ceiling with a red arrow pointing down to the infamous table, which sat in the middle of the busy room. I adore stuff like that. I do, because you painted this wonderful picture. You talk about being cinematic, but you also actually tied it into it. You actually tied it into a film as well that everybody knows. It's such a sharp way to do this. I love that.
Thank you. I really had a fun time with that. I love the restaurant. I just love the restaurant, and it's all true. I mean, and all the people looking at that table, with the little arrow going straight down. Right.
And I could just see the waitresses and the busboys, and I could hear the clattering, and I could smell the food cooking. I mean, it just sized it all up so beautifully there.
Thank you. There's another one, which is the Oyster Bar down in Grand Central, which I also wrote very carefully. Those are the two that are in.
Did you have to go do some research just to get it?
Oh, yeah. For the Oyster Bar, I really had to go to the saloon for a lot.
Yeah, I keep telling my wife that I've got to get back down to Key West and the Caribbean and research my next book. But and I was going to ask you that too, because that tends to work for me. I'll even just go on a vacation somewhere, and part of my vacation I'll spend getting to know the local area, and I'll make some notes. Like my second book is set in Key West. Well, that's where I honeymooned. I've been to Antigua. I've been to Curacao, and I start kind of working those locales in. New York City. I finally got to New York City later in life. Does that happen to you? Is it a byproduct, or do your travels kind of work their way subconsciously, or is it something you consciously say, wow, this was a great place I went on vacation. There's something interesting here I can use. Ever happen?
Yeah, a little bit. I lived in Paris for a while, and French stuff turns up in a lot of my books in different ways. they're not set in France. I did write a screenplay that had a lot of France in it. I'd like to do more of that. I really am sympathetic to what you do, but I was so taken with my, living on Bainbridge Island in Seattle, that really was the main focus of all of my books, except for I wrote another book called In Velvet, which is set in Yellowstone Park. And I spent a lot of time in Yellowstone Park, fishing and with my family. And that's as I think about it, that's a perfect example of what you're talking about, because not until I spent some time in Yellowstone that I understood what a powerful, important sort of setting it was, and how I could use it for a wonderful book, or what I hope was a wonderful book. And I would like to do more of that.
Yeah, and I'm obviously not the first to say this, but I think a setting done right becomes a character in itself.
Absolutely.
So I love to plumb those depths. So now you got me thinking. Is it Norman Cousins? River runs through it. You got me thinking of that one now with your fly fishing.
Oh, I love that book.
Isn't it fantastic? Have you? And I've got to ask you this, and I often do this to my guests, and they're like, I didn't know there was going to be a quiz. But have you read any Jim Harrison, from the late Jim Harrison?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I love Jim Harrison.
Well, he's one of my all-time favorites, and I got for Christmas, I got 2 of his newish compilations I hadn't read, and I want to tell you something, Bert. I saved them, those little essays that appeared in magazines and etc. I save them and I savor them and I enjoy them, and I only allow myself to read them when I'm distinctly reading for pleasure, and I'm definitely in range of a refrigerator. Because it always makes me so damn hungry. But I wondered about that with you. If that was a feature too, that kind of ideal.
Just to stick with Jim Harrison for a second, he was a big influence on me. I mean, I thought he was a very important writer for me. That's just to second what you're saying, I think. And I especially like a lot of the short stories, the little.
Yeah. Did you? What did you think of Legends of the Fall?
Well, the guy who wrote the screenplay Legends of the Fall also wrote Raggedy Man, so I knew him. And the movie never really quite worked, but the book seemed quite good to me, really good.
I wondered, because I didn't think it quite lifted off completely, the movie. There's some good moments, I think.
I agree with you. With you.
And I'm very wary being critical of fellow writers, really, because I know how hard it is to work. But I just, of course, I have to think, as you've already signaled, that there's a lot of cooks in the stew, right? So, yeah, who knows how many drafts that went through.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of the failings of the movie were from the writing of the screenplay. I never read the screenplay, so I really don't know. And it's often many different things. But I agree with you. There's some way that the movie didn't quite do what the book did.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we're getting to the end, and which just saddens me because I'm enjoying this conversation immensely, but I wanted to ask you 2 more questions. Just one last movie question right now. What do you think about Hollywood today? What they're putting out today? How do you feel about that? And of course, we can't even probably get into how movies are consumed right now because of the pandemic. But I would frankly rather just hear, what do you think about, pandemic aside, the output of Hollywood the past 20 years or so?
Well, it's changed enormously since I was there. That's part of the reason I left. I mean, it started, this is oversimplifying, but it started with Star Wars, when kids came to the movies, they saw the same movies 3-4 times, and suddenly the box office was so much bigger. And the movies made a shift where they were really designed for kids. And it happened in a slow and unconscious way, I think, but that was part of it. And, the thing that I look to for a positive side of that is that TV became much better. Yeah. There's all this long form television now. There's all the Netflix and Amazon and, any number of outlets where you can get really very high quality movies on TV, and they're often longer than movies. And you have a lot more. You have a lot of very talented movie people who've left to do television because of that. So, I mean, the short answer to a long story is that I think the quality of movies have changed dramatically, and they're much more, commercial in a sense that really doesn't interest me that much, and it's for a different audience. But a lot of that has been picked up with very fine, long form television.
I have to agree. It seemed like the merchandising as well played a role in the
Yes,
films, I would assume.
that's right.
And Star Wars was the bellwether for that as well, probably. So there's that. It seems like I had to declare a moratorium. I did this recently. I just said, look, I'm not going to another superhero film. I'm just not.
Yeah, you got to have a different mindset, a different age to really love that stuff, and I never did.
Yeah. So there's that. All right. Well, I appreciate that, and I agree with you about television. I don't know if you've seen the Harry Bosch.
Yeah, I do, and I like his writing too.
Oh, me too. I think Titus Welliver does a really nice job bringing Harry to the screen.
I thought he did an exceptional job, and I thought it was he added something. It wasn't all in the book. I mean, it's something that he brought to it.
Yeah, including the tattoos, I think.
Yeah.
And he's just like, I don't give a crap. I'm going to have tattoos. I'm not covering them up. And I thought, all right, fine. Okay, but the last thing, so to the writing, you obviously get a lot out of it. It's obviously something